Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the South Florida Tribune Broadcasting Network. We have a special edition of the Sports Exchange, and I have Louis Andio Weiss is with me.
What's going on, Scott?
And I have my mentor, Tony DeMarco, who trained me when I was just a little bit of a pup. And Tony, let the audience know what a real tough pup I was back in the day.
You had a lot to learn, let's put it that way.
Yeah, I would say so. Trying to go ahead and rip Joe Robbie, the former owner of the Miami Dolphins, when I was told not to do that, and I understood your reasoning why. But one thing, a bit of advice you gave me going on early in the process was read up on some of the other writers in the sporting news. I did that, and then you edited my stories back then. Yeah, I think as time went on, I got the hang of this whole thing. So with that said, okay, Tony, let's talk baseball, and we'll begin to ask you for your observations on the now completed World Series. Nationals are world champions.
I thought it was a great World Series to watch. Me, like a lot of other people, when the Astros picked up Greinke, I made a nice little future bet on them winning the World Series. They did have the best team, the best roster, and they almost got there. But this Washington team just got on a roll in the playoffs. Man, everything just kind of fell their way. They're losing the wild card game late. Knock Josh Hader around, win that one. They're down to the Dodgers, come back, boom, boom, boom. They win that series. So they just got on that roll, and they did have, they had the elite starting pitching that can win you those short series.
Well,
it all fell into place for them. It really did. It was fun to watch.
Fun to watch in a sense, Tony, because no home team won a game. First time ever that it's ever happened.
How crazy was that? That's just bizarre. A lot of it was, a lot of these results were unexpected, no doubt. I think that's what made it fascinating to me.
I mean, I agree with you, Tony. I think it was a very odd World Series. I mean, from the outset, I genuinely thought it would be a top 5 World Series ever, and it certainly had moments that you could put in the annals of like World Series history as among the greats. But I mean, at the same time, I was kind of shocked with the way it ended. I thought Hinch mismanaged his pitching staff in Game 7 of that series. I thought Greinke could have gotten through the 7th inning. Will Harris obviously gave up that big home run to Kendrick. And, Garrett Cole probably will never pitch for the Astros again, not only because of their, limitations with the way they kind of go about, signing free agents the way the Patriots do in the NFL, but he just didn't get a pitch in that game, and I feel like more than anything, if you wanted that season to end with the Astros on top, I feel like it should have been with Garrett Cole on the mound. He had been your best pitcher all season other than Verlander.
Couldn't agree more. I totally agree with that. He had to come into that game. I know he's never come into the middle of an inning, yada, yada. It's Game 7 of the World Series, so, It was warm. It wasn't he had warmed up. Even at the very least, he comes into the 8th inning. I know they're losing 3-2, but so what? Just hold them at 3-2, and then take your chances to come back with your great offense. So he had to be in that game. He just had to be.
Yeah,
and he's not going back there.
He won't, and it's funny. I saw a report come out today where Stanton wants the Yankees to step up and sign Strasburg and Cole. Now that both are free agents, Strasburg obviously just opted out of the final 4 years and $100 million of his contract.
If Stanton would give up some of his money, they could do it.
He can restructure his contract. I agree with you, but I just think the Yankees would behoove them to do that because at the same time they still owe Ellsbury another year. Tanaka's contract is still a thing. Stanton, and then you would have to add Cole and right. Strasburg. That Strasburg on an emotional appeal is going to get $175 million. It seems like, but he's 31 years old and he had Tommy John surgery 9 years ago. I mean, I expect him to be healthy, though he's only had 2 seasons of 200 or more innings pitched, which is always a concern. But, I mean, if you're going to give big money to a starting pitcher, and they're both going to get it, they both deserve it, I'm more comfortable with Cole getting that. But at the same time, I think Cole's going to wind up with the Angels. I just think the fit is natural, given he grew up, 5 minutes from that stadium, and, he was a Southern California kid.
That does fit, but, the Dodgers fit too, so it's going to be a huge bidding war. You'll get probably something like 8 years and 30 between 30 and 35 million a year. So do the math, 275 maybe, somewhere in that range. It'll be the biggest contract ever for a pitcher. Strasburg will get less. He's older. In Strasburg, I think they have a chance to keep him, and the Padres have a shot at him. And there aren't many places that he wants to go. I don't think he's very low key. I don't see him as a New York guy, especially under these circumstances where he'd be coming in and they'd be expected to win the World Series. I'm not sure he wants those kind of expectations. So I think Nationals actually have a chance at him.
Yeah, I'm going to
things unfold. They usually get crazy.
I'm going to chime in on that too. I think you're right. I think the Nationals stand a good chance to retain him. The only team that I could see going after him, and you just said it yourself, Tony, is San Diego Padres.
Yeah, he's from there.
Right, exactly.
That's the connection, and they need him. They need that guy.
Right.
To try to contend. Same with the Angels, and that's why they're linked with Cole. And so are the Yankees, really. So you can never discount how much money they're going to throw out there. So We'll see how it plays out.
So
it won't play out until like February, though. So yeah, I wouldn't get too excited about the hot stove yet.
Right.
Things seem to take longer and longer as the years go on. They drag them into March now, even. It's crazy.
I get the appeal of Strasburg to San Diego. Yeah, he did go to San Diego State and play under Tony Gwynn, and he is from that area. But you also need to consider this. San Diego, not until 3 years ago, they had never given $100 million to a player. And we need to understand this. For 2019, they committed $75 million to 3 players, and they still have 3 years of Will Myers left for $50+ million. You have 9 years of Manny Machado, Eric Hosmer, whose contract has been a total disaster so far. So, I mean, realistically, they'd be smart, and they have one of the best farm systems in the majors. Keith Law, who writes for ESPN, has actually ranked them as the best farm system in the majors for a couple of years in a row now. They would just be smart to really trade some of that prospect depth to get a starting pitcher who's nearing free agency rather than having to spend that much money on one. I just don't think it really makes sense to bring Strasburg in because he wouldn't be the difference in that team.
All right. Let's go back to something
well, that's true. But, even the owner himself said heads are going to roll if we don't win next year.
Right.
So, I could see him spending money on an ace pitcher. We'll see.
I agree.
Whether it's smart or not. You're right. Financially, everything you said was right on the money. But, these owners, they can afford it, or else they wouldn't do it.
Right.
So we'll see what they do.
Let's stay with the Nationals franchise for a moment, okay? You and I are old enough to understand it, but the franchise really should have won 2 titles since the 1994 strike ruined baseball in Montreal. There were an awful lot of good players on that team, Tony. I know them and the Yankees had the 2 best records in baseball before the strike killed that situation.
Right. Yeah, it doesn't mean they were going to win the World Series, but they did have the best record. It was a great team, and right after that, Larry Walker signed with the Rockies, and I was the Rockies beat writer then. And Walker he really he always complained about that. He really never got over the fact that they got robbed of going to the playoffs that year. He's just always that just got under his skin always. All through the years that he was in Colorado and then in St. Louis too as well. But that always bothered him.
Okay.
And I've heard Felipe Alou talk about that too. Yeah, they were all really frustrated by that.
Well, let's talk about the Tampa Bay Rays possibly playing half their games in Montreal. I know you and I both think it's ludicrous, but since it's out there,
yeah, it's total. The union's not going to let that happen. But go ahead.
Yeah, well, I mean, we'll talk about it. We'll go a minute on it if you want. Yeah, I think I could not see both places building a stadium to accommodate the franchise. It's not like the Kansas City Omaha Kings back in the NBA many years ago.
Don't forget the Philadelphia Eagles and the Steelers.
Kansas City and Omaha. That's not a big deal.
No, I know.
You're talking about a couple thousand miles. You're 2 different countries. How are these players? Where are they supposed to get houses in both places?
Right.
The union would just I can't see that one.
Me either. Okay, we'll leave it at that. But now, meanwhile, Bryce Harper has had to eat humble pie. You happy with that? I actually am. The guy wanted to leave Washington because he didn't think he could win there. But meanwhile, the Nationals have a ring, and he is without that piece of jewelry.
I'm not a Harper hater. I don't. I know he's flashy, he's a little bit showy player, but that's just kind of the generation.
Right.
And I accept that. He's actually, I don't want to say totally, he's kind of humble. I don't think he's a big showboat like some people do. Again, it's a business decision. He's a Boris guy. They go for the money.
Right.
So, I don't want to, I'm not going to go to the point where it's, I'm happy that he didn't win or anything. His teammates liked him. So I'll just leave it at that.
That's fine. Okay.
Tony, I wanted to add on that real quick because, like you, I don't necessarily dislike Harper either. I just think a lot of the expectations thrust upon him as a 16-year-old when he was hitting 500-foot home runs in Tropicana Field as a high schooler and having one of the best, college baseball seasons we've ever seen at 17 and at a JUCO kind of makes a lot of what is expected of him unrealistic.
Yep.
This idea that he had a bad first season in Philly is arbitrary because, if you want to use metrics like WAR, he was a 4-win player. That's an all-star. He drew 100 walks. He hit 30-plus home runs if you want to appeal to traditional metrics. I don't really understand the hate for him. I just think the money is obviously one thing that blinds the image of the player that we see on the field.
Well, I tell you what, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think, he's compared to Mike Trout. He's supposed to be that good. Maybe he's not quite that good. Trout's fantastic. Trout is a generational player. I think the expectations are a little bit too large, and I don't blame the Phillies season on him. He had a great season, I think. The Phillies had a lot of other issues. Bryce Harper was not one of them, if you ask me.
Yeah, and let me elaborate on that thought a little bit, too, because, he left Washington, didn't get the ring, but I've always loved his hard-nosed style of play, the way he runs after balls, or whether he runs into a wall. He's a hard-nosed player, and I think to Bryce's credit, he's one of those guys that could actually have played in the generation before this because he's that hard-nosed, and he would be appreciated on any era. So I'm not totally going ahead and not beating him up that badly. I'm just saying, in my opinion, the Nationals got the ring before he did. Does it even out later that he gets one? I don't know. I think the hiring of Joe Girardi will help because you have an excellent coach that's won a ring, that's done a lot of winning. But it is ironic that the Nationals got the ring before Bryce did. We'll see how it plays out later.
Well, you got to keep in mind that the $30 million that the Nationals saved on him, they put into Corbin and Howie Kendrick and some other key parts that made their team better. And they had Soto and Robles as young outfielders who are emerging. So, these things happen.
Yeah, and
I think the Nationals played it, they played it well. He could have stayed. They made him a good offer. But when he decided to go elsewhere, they used that money really wisely. Mike Rizzo deserves a lot of credit.
And to your point, Scott, I love the fact that Harper is hard-nosed, but if you look at the first 3 years of his career, he missed a few games, an extended amount of time due to injury. 2015 is like the pedestal that we've kind of set for him, because if you look at that, even he was at that point in 2015, Bryce Harper was, for the 1 year, he was the best player in baseball. He won the MVP, but he had a 198 OPS plus. If you're nearing 200 for OPS plus, that means you're 100% better by metrics than any other average player in the league. But he toned down that hard-nosed style of play. And I think that is really interesting. It just kind of showed, he'll probably never get to that ceiling again because that's just, the bar that he set for himself. But at the same time, tampering down that style of play saw him have the best season of his career.
So with that,
two things on that is, I think he was playing too hard, and that's, you can get hurt that way. I think so. He kind of dialed it back a little bit, which in one way that's kind of smart because he stayed on the field a lot this year. That year was just through the roof, off the charts. I'm not sure that he will ever get back to that because he's pitched differently now, and he's viewed differently because of that year. But that was an incredible year, no doubt.
So let's talk about the Nationals.
He can still be a Hall of Famer.
Yes.
Oh yeah,
absolutely. I agree with you.
Where he is, what team he's on. He didn't win the World Series this year. He's still on a Hall of Fame track for me.
Yeah, and he's only just turning 27, so
exactly.
He's got plenty of time.
His best years are coming. Maybe not to that MVP level, but he's going to put together 5 or 6 years here till he gets to his 33